Good evening, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland on the D-Day beaches of Normandy. And I don't have to go very far in time wise, just 1 hour east to Eastern Europe time. And then I got to drop south a few degrees latitude to the beautiful Crimea. And I have got on the show tonight, Regis Tremblay. How are you doing, Regis?
Oh, I'm doing great, Jeff. Good to be with you.
You know, Regis and I have actually known each other for several years, and he's had me on his show, I think now 4 times, a couple of times with Eric Arno. And I kept saying, I need to get you on my show. and just to learn about Crimea and Russia and Ukraine. And then a good friend of mine, TP Thomas Wilkinson, sent me a YouTube link, and I couldn't believe it. It is a movie by Regis called Ghost of Jeju, and I noticed in all of his emails, he said in his signature below that he was a filmmaker, and by golly, he is, and it was a wonderful movie. So we're here tonight to learn about his outstanding documentary, Ghost of Jeju. So are you ready, Regis?
Ready to go.
Well, listen, tell us, I think you're a Maina, I think as they call themselves at least, you're a Maina from Maine. For those of you who are not in the United States, it's the last state in New England up against New Brunswick and Quebec. Well, actually, yeah, even maybe a little bit of Nova Scotia too. But anyway, eastern Canada. And beautiful, beautiful, beautiful part of the world. Anyway, tell us a little bit about your background. I suppose you did not, come out of your mother's womb understanding, the ways of the world, and what you were taught in school was wrong about the USA and Western Empire. So just give us a quick background of your arc of awareness about the United States and how you grew up.
Well, as you mentioned, I was born and raised in Waterville, Maine, and it was a very French-Canadian part of town. There were French-speaking people that lived in one part of town. There were English and Irish people lived in another part of town. There were some Syrians that lived in another part of town. And so I grew up in a very provincial environment, very Catholic. I used to say my mother was more Catholic than the Pope. As a youngster, I loved sports, and I wasn't interested much in school. But when I got through with grade school, I thought I'm either going to go to Canada to play hockey, because I loved hockey and I was a pretty good player, or I want to be a priest. And son of a gun, the Carmelite Fathers, who were in Hamilton, Massachusetts, sent a recruiter up. I sent a little postcard and said I was interested. And the guy came to the house. It was like a football recruiting thing today. And he said, we're going to invite you to come up during the summer for 1 week. It's a summer camp. And, there'll be a couple hundred other kids there from New England, New York, New Jersey, that area. So I went, oh, this is where I'm going. This was boys' heaven, let me tell you. Well, that began a very excellent educational experience for me. The Carmelites were really excellent educators. Was very strict in terms of the discipline, and the studies were very rigorous. Well, I did 4 years of high school there, and then I went on to 4 years of college in Niagara Falls, Ontario. My order had established a large college, granite monastery, really, overlooking the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. Beautiful location. And 4 years of incredible college education, liberal arts. I majored in history, U.S. history and philosophy. And from there, I was given the opportunity to go to Rome to do 4 years of postgraduate studies in theology, languages, scripture. And I was ordained a priest in 1971. And I'm going to skip over most of the rest of the part of that, except to say that I grew up a red, white, and blue, patriotic, flag-waving American kid. I believed that America was the good guy and we were spreading freedom and democracy around the world, that we won World War II. But 4 years in Europe, the 4 years of schooling in Rome, but I had the chance to travel throughout Europe. I had classmates from almost every European country, including a couple of guys from Poland and Czechoslovakia. There were guys from the Philippines. There were guys from Africa. There were guys from Central and South America. And my eyes were opened. You know, everybody would say, oh, we like America. You know, there's a lot of good things about America. We like your music. We like your movies. But, you know, your government is pretty terrible. Look what you're doing in Vietnam. That was during the Vietnam era when I was there, 1968 to 72. You people are racist. You're bigots. Look what you've done to the black people in your country. And then it was just like my eyes were opened. And, you know, the other thing that I realized was, you know, these other countries, they're pretty advanced. They've been around for a couple thousand years, you know, and they have just as good electronics as we have in the States. They're just as good optics from Germany. Anything you wanted there, you had. You didn't miss anything. And then the food. I mean, I grew up on like meat and potatoes and spaghetti. And the food there was incredible. Well, anyway, came back to the States, and I'll make this part kind of short. I ended up teaching in a high school, a Catholic high school that my order had and still has in Tucson, Arizona. And I taught religion for the first year, and I didn't like that. These poor kids sitting in a classroom, they're falling asleep, and you know, it's not the time to be trying to teach theology to high school kids. Anyway, there'll be others who may disagree with me, but the following year, we had a new principal, and he fired the journalism teacher, the yearbook instructor, and I said, you can't do that. We have to have a yearbook. We have to have a newspaper. The school's been around for 35 years, and that's historical documentation. You can't do. He said, all right, nobody else wants it. You take it. And so without any training in journalism, except that I had been doing photography for a school photographer in high school and college. And so I've been doing photography since I was just a little kid. I took it over not knowing anything. Long story short, I taught photojournalism, I taught yearbook, and that really got me excited about telling stories. I taught the kids how to tell stories. And when I finished teaching in high school, shortly after that, I left the Carmelite order and the priesthood, and I got married and raised kids, and you know, struggled at first to make a living and support the family, and you know, just was on the treadmill like everybody else. But I was using photography in everything I did, wherever I went. It was doing brochures, it was just for promotions, public relations, that kind of thing. But when video became affordable and small, I said, I've got to switch from photography to video, because video, I knew, was the most powerful tool known to the human race, communication tool known to the human race. And so I started taking video, shooting video, probably around the late 80s, early 90s. And I'll fast forward again. I ended up coming back to Maine. I lived in Arizona for 35 years, raised my kids there. And when I came back to Maine, I happened to have some friends who were activists, and most of them at that time were environmental activists. There's a lot of stuff that was being done to Maine's incredible wilderness, rivers, lakes.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful. And So I started documenting that. I had a small camera, video camera, started documenting that, uploading it to YouTube, and people really appreciated it. So it was really rewarding. Well, I ended up befriending Bruce Gagnon, and I have to give him a shout out on this show. We've been best friends now for a lot of years, more than a dozen. And I was sitting in his office one day. We lived very close to each other. And he said, you know, I got to find some people to go to Jeju Island. And there's an organization in California that are going to pay for the trip, the airfare. And I just need to find some people. I said, I'll go. And he said, you will? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, will your wife let you? I was married this for a second time then. And I said, oh, she's going to be totally in support of it. Well, I'd already had a passport and a visa wasn't required. So 2.5 weeks later, I was on my way to South Korea. And it ended up being a life-changing, in many ways, experience in my lifetime. I say that it changed the trajectory of my life radically. So how did I get there? I sort of explained, you know, how I got into making movies. Well, I had never done a feature film. I'd always done, you know, just documenting different things. When people were put on trial for protesting, I would go to the courtroom and document that. But Korea was a different thing. I thought I was just going to go there and document it had been 7 years, 24/7, a protest by these really simple people, farmers and fishermen in Kangjang village. It's a right on the sea, and they're basically farmers and fishermen. And the South Korean government, pressured by the United States, were building a massive naval base right in this town and on that seashore that's protected, to accommodate Obama's pivot to Asia. It was Obama and Hillary Clinton at that time. Well, I thought I was just going to go there, and I had three cameras really, two 35 millimeter DSLRs, and I was shooting photo and video both. And then I had a cell phone, which was taking really high definition video even at that time. So I was carrying quite a bit of equipment, and I thought I was just going to do a 15-20 minute short video like I always did about the protest.
Yeah.
Well, I really encourage everybody to watch that film. It's been translated into 7 languages now, including Russian, all by volunteers because I didn't have the money. And I was there for a month, and every day, day and night, I was with these people who've been protesting, literally 24/7. I was so inspired by them, by their determination, by their enthusiasm, their creativity. Americans could learn a lot of how to do a protest. It's not done on a Saturday and then it's over until the next week. They were sometimes brutally beaten by hundreds of police. They were rotated in like once a month from the mainland, 300, 400, 500 of them. Young kids, basically, men and women. And the protesters would sit in front of the gate where these cement trucks came in. And sometimes 50, 60 cement trucks a day. They just streamed in. They would sit there and block it. The police would remove them. It was very hot. It was in the summer. And I ate with them. I spent all my time with them. Well, as driving around, and they were showing me these burial mounds, I thought, gee, that's kind of interesting how they bury their dead. Well, I found out later, and by the way, they also talked about ghosts. And I thought, well, maybe this is part of their spirituality or whatever, their mythology. They talk about ghosts. And well, it wasn't until I was on my way home. I had like 5 or 6 days left, and we stopped at this museum on the northern tip of Jeju Island. It was called the April 3rd Peace Museum in English. That's what it said, April 3rd Peace Museum. They took me there. It was a couple of priests that actually took me there, befriended me, and made all of this happen. And I went with a priest and an artist, and the artist had been painting these images all around Kangjang village, protest pictures. And they said, well, you have to go to the Peace Museum because he has a big exhibit there and you'll see it. And I thought it was just going to be another painting type of thing. We walk in, we watch this movie, and I'm going, oh my God. The movie was all archival video or film and photos from before the Korean War. In other words, immediately after the end of World War II, when the Koreans thought they were liberated from 35 years of Japanese occupation, only to find out that the United States military government took over South Korea. We won't go into the politics of that, the 38th parallel, the division north and south, only to say that what was captured in this archival classified material until late 1990s, it showed a horrendous massacre. The Americans were afraid that these people on Jeju Island, peasants, all peasants, no weapons, were protesting the fact that they weren't free. They were now governed by the United States. They wanted their independence. They wanted a united Korea. And they actually rose up in great numbers, sticks and stones and spears. And the Americans got really afraid and thought this was a communist uprising, a red uprising. And they wanted to show Washington that they had it under control. So what happened was the United States recruited, they were basically constabularies. They were police officers. Many of them had worked with the Japanese. It changed colors. And in a period of a year and a half, they massacred as many as, well, they say between 30 and 50,000 men, women, and children. It was just a free fire zone on this small island. And when I found that out, I was deeply troubled, deeply, deeply troubled. Something was happening inside of me that was a combination of embarrassment and anger at what I had learned about what my country had done. Now, I want to just do a little parallel thing here. You had asked me ahead of time, how many bases are there in Korea? You know, there's probably a dozen, and there's been as high as 40,000 American troops stationed there since the end of World War II. Throughout the Korean conflict, they've been there since. Massive bases, doing all kinds of drills, live fire drills. And when I saw the size of the American presence there, that kind of connected me to what I had just witnessed on the island and the protesters and the massacre of their ancestors. Many of them had parents who were massacred. They all had relatives who were massacred. This was deeply ingrained in them. And I connected for the first time in my life, American imperialism, the American occupation of another country. Well, I returned to the States and I thought, oh my God, this is not 15-minute little film on a protest. This is an incredible story that I've never heard. I don't think anybody's ever heard this. And so I thought, how am I going to do this? I started doing a lot more research. I went to the National Archives with my youngest son. He helped me, and we're going through the archives looking for anything we could find, photographs, film, video. And we spent a couple of days at it, returned back to Maine, and I started outlining what I thought I wanted to do. And it took quite a while. Well, I shouldn't say quite a while. Uh, I made this movie in the next 4 months, completed it, which was incredibly fast, considering that it's an hour-plus film. And then what I did was I started with the protests, and I connected it and what was happening in Korea with the foreign policy of the United States, which was to invade, to steal resources, cheap labor, and to establish military bases. And that followed through the entire film. And I intermingled scenes from the protests, the people singing, people getting arrested, people getting thrown in jail, people in the hospital. And it turned out to be, well, I think something really special. I had some interesting people. You had asked about that in the film, and the title was very interesting. You had mentioned, how did I meet Oliver Stone? He has a little cameo part in it, but he had a big part in the trailer. Well, Bruce Gagnon knew Peter Kuznick, who's a professor at American University.
Yeah, they did the movies together about
the Untold History of the United States.
Yeah, okay.
The book and the movie. And Bruce said, Regis would like to have Oliver do a little piece for the film. And so we went down to Washington. Oliver was there to do a presentation with Peter. And so I had these two young guys that I mentored when they were in college, and then they started their own business that really took off. They came down with all their equipment, with lights and the cameras, and had it all set up. And Oliver walks in, and there's an entourage, a bunch of people following him, and people knew that he was coming, and they wanted to talk to him. And I'm getting nervous because, we only had like 10 minutes with Oliver, is what we were told. And here these people trying to take the time away from us. So Oliver walks in and he goes, I said, "Hello, Oliver, I'm Regis Tremblay." And he goes, "You're Regis Tremblay."
En français.
And I said, "Well, I'm French-Canadian descent, that's correct." And I said, "I'm really grateful. Now, we're all ready to shoot, Oliver. We're not going to take much of your time. We'd just like you to say on camera what you know about Korea." And he didn't know much. But he said he was married to a Korean for 17 years at the time, and they had a lovely daughter.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That surprised me when I watched the movie.
Yeah. So when the boys had the cameras on, and he's sitting there, and he says, "Let me have a look. I want to see what this looks like." So they snapped a couple of screenshots and showed it to him, and he, like this, and he, okay, ready to go. And he said, "By the way, what's the name of this film?" And I said, "I'm not sure yet. I think it's going to be Jeju in the crosshairs of war again." And he looked at me and he goes, "That sucks." Well, the boys laughed. I was nervous. Okay. And now I'm like, oh my God, here this Academy Award winner made all of these films, just telling me, that title sucks. And so we do the film, the interview, which he was really gracious and very good. And we've been in contact since, off and on. If I write to him, he'll always answer me. I went back home, and then I interviewed somebody that said he was in the military and talking about being writing a book. And he said the soldiers that were there during the Korean War had massacred a lot of Koreans, and they saw ghosts around them all the time. And one night I woke up and it came to me. The people in Jeju had been talking about ghosts in these burial mounds. Oliver said, "Oh, that title sucks." And then I'd heard about these other American soldiers who had been seeing ghosts around them all the time. And I thought, that's it, Ghost of Jeju. Now, I'll tell you another little funny anecdote. When we finished taping this little interview with Oliver, he said, if it's not going to take too much time, I'd happy to do your voiceover. And I go, oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much, Oliver. So I went home. I tell my wife, and I told Bruce Gagnon, I told the boys, and I told a bunch of other people. Well, the boys heard him say it. Oliver wants to do the voiceover for the film. They say, oh, man, that's fantastic. You're going to get so much exposure with Oliver Stone, his name on this thing. And I thought about it, and I said, after a great deal of thought, I said, no. I said, this was a transformative experience for me. I said, I have to tell this story through my eyes, and not only my eyes and my mind, but my heart. And some people said, you're crazy. And other people said, no, you're right. People who knew me and knew me well. And so it's just an interesting little anecdote about Oliver Stone. So I don't know. Do you want me to just continue the story, or do you want to ask me some questions?
Well, tell me how you met Bruce Cummings, and of course I know who he is, and I know his books, but he actually had quite 2 or 3 segments in the movie. Tell us about Bruce Cummings. I mean, he's probably the greatest, at least in the English language, the greatest Korean War historian alive.
Right. There were people who had preceded me, Americans and from a couple of other countries, to Jeju to witness what was happening and go back and, in their own words, tell people. Nobody had done a video. Nobody had done a movie. And Bruce Gagnon had been there before me, and he knew this Irish priest, Patrick Cunningham, became a really close friend to this day. Patrick made all the arrangements once I landed, picked me up, and he actually escorted me to Jeju, spent a week or so with me there. Then he went back to Seoul and came back to get me and go to the museum, and then we would go back to Seoul. And I stayed with him in they had a huge monastery. So there are a bunch of older Irish priests who have been in Korea their entire lives. Patrick said, you got to read Bruce Cummings. He's still at the University of Chicago. Get his book. And so I wrote that down, got home, looked for the book, ordered it, and then started searching for him. And I found an email, because he's a professor at University of Chicago. Mm-hmm. I contacted him, told him about the movie and that I really needed him in this film to explain the history, because he is considered the preeminent scholar in the world about Korean history. And he agreed. And so I said, well, geez, he's in Chicago. He says, well, I come down to Virginia. My wife she's Korean. He's married to a Korean too. And she's teaching at the University of Virginia. So I made arrangements to go down with the same two boys, and spent the day with him in their apartment, just letting him talk, asking him specific questions. And he was absolutely incredible. When he saw the film, he expressed his deep appreciation and for his role in it, but also for me making the film. He said, you've told a story nobody else has told. This is really important. And so we became friends. He actually arranged the screening at the University of Chicago. Now, this is another interesting thing. I thought I had something. It was technically a pretty polished production. And I screened it, premiered it at home in Brunswick, Maine. It was in a Brunswick library. It was packed, standing room only. I don't even want to guess at the number, and I don't count those things, but it was close to 100. And we screened the film, and when it was over, and it looks like it's ending a couple of times, but there's this very uplifting, happy music. Well, people started clapping and they standing up. They thought it was over. I had tears in my eyes. And they said, you've got to enter this into film festivals because this is incredible. I entered it, and it costs a lot of money to enter into film festivals. $50 for some, 100. 21 film festivals. 20 rejected it. One, the Peace on Earth Film Festival in Chicago, Illinois, accepted it and gave it a major award.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. And so I knew that other people appreciated this.
Well, I did. I loved it. I couldn't believe it. I thought, wow, this is Regis, my friend. He did this. It was really impressive.
Here's another part of the sickness of this whole culture that we live in the industry. I tried to contact agents. I tried to contact the industry people, distributors. Not a one was interested. Not a single one. And I thought, whoa. Well, I'll start traveling with it. I screened the film a couple of other times with activists in Maine, and then people in Massachusetts heard about it, and then people gave me lists of people in other states, and I eventually made 2 cross-country trips, showing the film to groups of people, activists, anti-war activists, anti-nuclear activists, social justice people, Quakers. I showed it in church halls. I showed one time outdoors on a laptop. 2 people showed up. It was in New Mexico.
Oh, that's funny.
And so I was up and down California. Well, I say up and down California, a number of California cities, Oregon, Washington, the Midwest, down to Florida. I mean, I did 2 trips. And what I did, I didn't have the money. I was retired, a Social Security and a small state pension. I had to ask people for money to go to Korea and pay for the expenses when I was there, and I had expenses making the film.
Oh yeah.
And so to get around the country, so everybody was still using DVDs at the time.
Yeah.
They weren't streaming, thank God. So I made thousands of copies of DVDs and brought them with me and said,
okay.
I have this film available on a DVD. I could use a small donation to help me get from one place to the other because I don't have the money. And, $5, $25, whatever you can. And if you can't afford anything, you just promise me that you'll show it to somebody else in your living room or at your church or in your library. And I was running out of discs. Everybody all along the way wanted copies of the discs. And so I don't know how many tens of thousands of people have seen it because it rippled out. And YouTube, it's 6,000, 7,000 of one version and thousands of others. And so that's basically how it got around. It got all over the world, which really blew me away because a woman in France that I had met on Facebook said, God, that movie is incredible. Can I translate it for you? Oh, yeah. I said, can't pay. She's, no, I don't want any pay. I'll just translate it. And I knew a little bit of French from high school and college. And so when she sent me the text, I was able to put the subtitles in because I knew enough French that I could do that. Well, the next thing I know, this a friend from it was a Catholic priest missionary in South America. He saw it and he said, I'll translate it for you. This has to be translated into Spanish. He did it. I knew Spanish, so I put the subtitles in and on. And then it was Italian. The Koreans and the Chinese did it all on their own. They distributed that film. I have no way to track it, no way to know. But the Koreans were traveling all around South Korea to show that film.
Good.
Korean subtitles. A young woman translated into Mandarin, and it got around China, parts of China anyway. I have no idea. So anyway, ultimately, somebody translated it into Russian. And I have a woman who's been my interpreter and my guide, and she's actually now a partner in my filmmaking. She helped me put the Russian subtitles on the Russian version, and that's been going around in Russia, and I have no idea.
Yeah, probably
So
hundreds of thousands of people have seen it in total.
Well, I don't know, but it has made a big impact and has influenced a lot of people. What I would like to say, personally, because I mentioned it in the beginning, going to Jeju and making this film changed the trajectory of my life radically. I couldn't call myself an activist. Not even when I was documenting my friends getting arrested for protest and the environmental things. I saw myself as a filmmaker, a storyteller. But making this film turned me into a raving lunatic, an activist, and I kept on documenting protests. I did the climate march in New York City. I wasn't one of those guys that would get out there with signs and would get arrested, but I was a filmmaker. I wanted to tell the stories. Well, because of the film, Ghost of Jeju, I started researching and doing a lot of research and reading books about all these bases that America had all over the world. And I started connecting with people who were teaching me about the real history of the United States. It was built on genocide, slavery, the theft of land and resources, and that swept across the country and went across from the West Coast everywhere else. And America's been doing it ever since. I never learned that I was a history major. I only learned what the good guys did. And, the Pilgrims were wonderful and the first Thanksgiving and, anyway, I became so immersed in learning about the history of the United States, the foreign policy, the lies, the propaganda. And what was happening at the time is Russia was getting hammered, and Russia's the bad guy. Russia intervened in the election. And so I said, I'm going to make my next film. And I was working on it. It was called 30 Seconds to Midnight. And there were two premises. One, there are only two threats to life on the planet, existential threats: climate change or environmental degradation, the sixth mass extinction, whatever people want to call it, and possibility of a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. I said, I got to go to Russia to find out for myself what Russia's like, what the Russian people are like, and what they think. Well, I started raising money. In the meantime, I was invited to go to Odessa in Ukraine for the May 2nd, second anniversary of the massacre in Ukraine, which happened in 2014, just a couple of months after the coup in Kiev, which was funded, organized, promoted, commanded by the United States of America. John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, Joseph Biden as vice president was the guy running the show. And I started learning about all this stuff, and I said, oh my God, this terror that America is inflicting on the world doesn't stop. And so that was an incredible experience. I came face to face with what they're calling neo-Nazism, the neo-Nazis in Ukraine, face to face with them, right-wing gangs throwing stones at our bus. And this was before the Azov battalion became a battalion of fighting unit. But this ideology morphed into that fighting unit. Well, then I went to Russia, and my goodness, my eyes were opened. I came to Crimea to find out the truth about Crimea. And I went back home, and I finished the film, 30 Seconds to Midnight, with much about Russia and who Russia is. Russia's foreign policy has always been diplomacy. Russia doesn't have bases in 90 countries around the world. They haven't invaded. People say, yeah, Chechnya and South Ossetia. Russia has not invaded anywhere else around the world and left bases. They're not colonizers. And so I made that film, and that film took off. I didn't even bother entering it in film festivals because I knew by now anything against anything against the narrative is going to get ignored. It's going to get ignored.
Yeah.
Again, I traveled the country twice with that film. And then I came back to Russia another 3 times, and I've been living in Crimea now for 2 years, and I made a third film. I've only made 3 major films. The third film was because I was so angry at what my country has been doing to malign the Soviet Union and Russia since Harry Truman, the end of World War II. And I felt that I needed to tell the story about why America and Americans hate Russians. And that's the name of the film. Who are these Russians and why do we hate them? That film has taken off. And so I give you a little personal story of the filmmaking I've done, why I did it, how I got into it. But I think the most important thing that I want to say is how it changed my life, how it opened my eyes to the reality of what I will now call the United States of America and the collective West. Its vassals across Europe, Japan, Okinawa, South Korea, Australia, you go on and on and on. And that's been what my mission has been for the last 2 or 3 years. In the videos I've continued to make here in Russia and in Crimea to show the history, the culture, the lifestyle of the people, I've interviewed people to try to show Americans, these people are just like us. They have the same hopes, the same aspirations. They want nothing but the best for their children. They want safety, security. They don't want to live in fear. And you know, if Americans could only see, and that's why I think my videos have made a significant impact, the way these people live their lives. This is a peaceful country. This is not a divided country like the United States is now over an infinite number of issues. Russia has been focused simply since the World War II and through the 1990s on surviving and creating a country for themselves that has given them safety and peace and raised their standard of living incredibly. And this is what they've been trying to preserve. Russia's military doctrine, unlike the United States, is defensive. It's defensive. The Russian Federation, forget the Soviet Union. You know, they wanted this communism go around the world, blah, blah, blah. No more communism here. No more ideology to spread around the world. Russia's focus for the last 22 years has been to rebuild the country, improve the life of their people, and protect themselves from 77 years of American aggression, threats, and attacks. And this is where they are today. Putin has said it repeatedly. We will never use nuclear weapons first. But he's made it very clear that if attacked, Russia will unleash its entire nuclear arsenals and there will be no survivors anywhere. So I've given you a little personal story about the filmmaking, how I got into it quite by accident, how I made the first film quite by accident, did not intend to do that, how it changed my life, and why I am living here now in the Russian Federation, because I still feel with whatever time I have left, I'm going to continue to fight the narrative. to continue to fight the propaganda, to continue to fight the lies. And for the last, well, since February, my focus has pretty much been on what is really happening in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And now, as people around the world, but in America, are beginning to realize they've been lied to. The narrative is falling apart as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
The New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, they're all saying, whoa, wait a minute, things aren't going so good. And now they're blaming each other. The CIA is being blamed again for intelligence failure. And the Defense Department is getting blamed for being, you didn't make the right decisions. And Biden's White House is being blamed for, not listening to the right people. And the media is being blamed. And it's really funny. It's actually funny for me to look at and watch this unfold. And I just wonder how many of the people who've befriended me and the thousands like me and us who have been saying these things for years will now say, hot damn, Reggie was right. I'm not going to wait too long for that though, Jeff. Anyway, I want to, and you had another question for me, and
well,
did I stay in touch with any of the people in
Yeah.
I receive an email every day from, there's a young woman who's been photographing every day, documenting the whole thing. I respond to some of those. A woman, and I'm going to mention her, Sung-hee Choi, has been the coordinator of this, now it's like 15-year demonstration, protest, been the coordinator of this, has dedicated her life to this. We are still in contact with me. She's a board member of Bruce Gagnon's Global Network. Father Pat Cunningham, I'm in touch with him regularly. We become really good friends. I befriended the Jesuits. And you remember in the film, the little old priest with a white beard?
Yeah.
His name is Father Moon.
Yeah,
and we became really good friends. And we correspond. He'll see a video that I produce, and he'll send something. He speaks a little bit of English fairly well. He'll answer. I was friends with the Jesuits that were there. They've been there all along protesting, and but I've lost contact with them. I think they might have got transferred to different places. But anyway, so I've maintained contact with people really everywhere I've been, and that's why I have my Regis Tremblay Global Network friends from around the world.
Well, let me ask you one more. Well, actually, I asked you a question. What is the status of this unwanted, unnecessary boondoggle base in Jeju?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I had the opportunity to return, and I went to a global network. Their annual meeting is in a different country, and it was held in Japan. And so I went to Japan, and then I went down to Okinawa and spent 2 weeks, I think it was, 2 full weeks in Okinawa, where the people are protesting American bases there.
1/3 of that island is occupied by the U.S.
What they call it, that Okinawa is American base.
Yeah.
And then from there, I jumped down to Jeju, and the base was completed. And it was terrible to see what I had seen originally is this pristine coastline, crystal clear water you could see, rare species that were just destroyed, their habitats destroyed. And Kangjang village was becoming a place to accommodate the needs of thousands of sailors and military.
Prostitutes and the bars, and
it was just the same thing. It was going on around every American base, wherever they are: Korea, Japan, Germany, England, wherever they are. That's what they bring with them.
One of the biggest drivers of human trafficking in the world is America's 900 military bases around the world, and they traffic, young girls and young boys, and they need to have their lusts satisfied, and they get what they want. And I'm really sorry to hear that, because there were those beautiful hexagonal shaped rocks, on the coast that you filmed, that they were destroying. And like in Ireland has what are those called? There's something of the giants in Northern Ireland, the same kind of rock formations from cooling off into hexagons, and it just looked really beautiful. And now that's all gone. Anyway, it's just been wonderful. I had all these questions, but you are a movie maker, and you took control of this.
No, can I add one more thing?
Of this discussion, and you did an outstanding job, and I am so happy to have you on the show.
Listen,
go ahead.
Can I add one more thing? Because I think this is really important, and you'd asked about this in some of the questions you sent me ahead of time. How have I been received by people? Were they skeptical of an American coming there with cameras and taking pictures and videos? And I have to tell you this. I didn't go in cold. Everywhere I went, from Korea to Ukraine to Russia, I have had people there who knew I was coming and who served as my host, my guides, my interpreters. And so immediately when people have found out, whether it was in Korea, whether it was in Ukraine, Odessa, or whether it was in Russia, wherever I've been, people have been so accepting. When they learn what I'm doing, and it's a very simple message, I'm just trying to tell the truth, to show American people who you are and what you're about and what's going on here in your country. They're so grateful. I can't tell you, I've not had not one uncomfortable situation anywhere I've been. Not one. Never feared for my safety. In Odessa, yes, we were somewhat intimidated. It could have been not good. But
with the Nazis,
Yeah. So anyway, I want to thank you, Jeff, for having.
Well, this has been wonderful. We've known each other for 2 or 3 years, and I'm going. Now I know your background. I'm fascinated. I'm really impressed, and please send me the YouTube links of your 3 movies, and if you have the YouTube links of any of your movies that are translated, that have been subtitled into different languages, I will post those. And my little website gets a lot of traffic, and I will be happy to promote your work and recommend it to people. And it's just been terrific. And I know we're going to stay in touch, because we're both fighting the good fight. And
that's
I'm
right.
Sure,
we're comrades. We're comrades.
That's right. And I'm sure the way things are going, I'll probably be back on your show sooner than later. So anyway, wonderful, Regis. Thank you so much. I will get this produced and send you the link. And in the meantime, send me all the links for your channel and your movies and everything, and anything else you want to send me. And I will post that on China Raj Radio Sinoland.
Great. Appreciate it. I'll do
all
that.
Right.
Jeff.
A Buddhist bow to a good man. All right.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.